Okay, so we've got a genuine constitutional mystery on our hands. Seriously. A revolution was supposed to completely shake the foundations of American government back in 2025. All the signs were pointing to it. The battle lines were drawn, and then poof, it just vanished.
So the big question is, what happened? Why on earth did the Supreme Court, after years of signaling this monumental shift, suddenly pull back from the brink? Well, the answer reveals this incredible story about power, about strategy, and believe it or not, a quiet transformation that might be even more significant than the revolution that never even happened.
All right, so to really get what disappeared, we've got to rewind to June 2025. This was supposed to be the moment it all kicked off. The big case on the docket was FCC versus Consumers Research. And look, everyone expected the court to use this case to revive a long-dormant constitutional weapon, basically to dismantle the power of federal agencies. But instead, in a 6-3 decision, the court did the exact opposite. They upheld the law. It left everyone who was braced for impact just completely stunned. Now, to get why this was such a shocker, we need to talk about that weapon they decided to leave on the shelf. And that weapon, yeah, it has a name. It's the core concept at the heart of this whole thing, the non-delegation doctrine. First things first, you gotta understand what was on the line here. We're talking about the administrative state. That whole alphabet soup of agencies, the EPA, the FCC, OSHA. These are the folks who write the super detailed rules that govern pretty much everything from clean air to workplace safety. And for a lot of critics, this massive concentration of power in the hands of unelected officials, well, that's a huge problem. And the weapon they wanted to use to fight it? It was this really powerful constitutional theory. The idea is actually pretty simple. It's rooted right there in Article I of the Constitution. It says all legislative powers belong to Congress. So the thinking goes, Congress can't just hand that power off to someone else, right? They have to make the laws, not turn a bunch of agency officials into mini legislators. But, in practice, the courts pretty much let this slide for a long, long time. For almost a century, they basically said, hey, delegation is fine as long as Congress gives an agency some kind of intelligible principle to follow. The problem? This test was so lenient, it was almost a joke. Just telling an agency to regulate in the public interest, yeah, that was good enough. Legal scholar Cass Sunstein actually had a great line about this back in 2000. He joked that the doctrine had, and I quote, one good year and 211 bad ones. That one good year was 1935, when it was actually used to strike down a couple of New Deal laws. But after that, yeah, it was a total paper tiger. But then, things started to change. In a 2019 case called Gundy, you had several justices, with Justice Gorsuch leading the charge, basically declaring they were ready to put some real teeth back into this idea. So you fast forward to 2025, you've got a conservative supermajority on the court. The stage was perfectly set for a huge showdown. And then, crickets. Nothing. So, why? Well, that brings us to the first big twist in our story. It turns out the court didn't actually need its old constitutional bazooka. Why? Because in the years leading up to this big case, it had been quietly forging a whole new set of weapons. So instead of a full-blown constitutional revolution, the court went for something quieter, more surgical. You can think of it like choosing a scalpel over a sledgehammer. It lets them achieve pretty much the same goals, but without causing this massive political explosion. So let's break down these two paths, right? On one hand, you've got the non-delegation route. That's the constitutional bombshell. It's super high risk. It's basically picking a direct fight with Congress, and it screams judicial activism. But the other path, using these tools of what's called statutory interpretation, now that is much, much shrewder. It's technical, it's case by case, and it lets the court rein in agencies while saying, hey, we're just reading the law as it's written. Let's take one of these new tools, for example, the major questions doctrine. Now, the court has used this exact doctrine to strike down major agency actions on everything from climate change to vaccine mandates and student loans. The logic is actually really simple. If an agency is going to do something huge, something with massive economic and political significance, Congress had better have given it crystal clear permission. A vague, old law from decades ago? Nope, that's not going to cut it. It's an incredibly powerful check on agency authority that never even has to whisper the word non-delegation. Okay, so the court found a subtler way. That's part one of the answer to our mystery. But there's a second, and honestly even deeper reason the revolution just vanished. What if the entire historical justification for it
was all just a myth.
See, the whole originalist argument for a strong non-delegation rule, and that's the idea that we should interpret the Constitution based on how it was understood way back when it was written, it all rests super heavily on the philosopher John Locke. He's the guy who wrote way back in 1689 that a legislature can't just transfer its lawmaking authority. But what if that's just wrong? What if the actual historical record tells a totally different story? Because a whole wave of recent scholarship has dug into the evidence, and the conclusion is pretty clear. Locke's influence on the actual design of the Constitution, well, it seems to have been wildly overstated.
And this isn't just some theoretical debate either. Modern legal scholarship, like a 2021 article from the Chapman Law Review, is actively re-examining these historical claims and, frankly, finding them lacking. They're literally calling the originalist argument an elaborate myth.
I mean, when historians actually dig into the records, what do they find? They find that Locke's influence was at its peak before 1776, as a justification for the revolution itself. But once the war started and the focus shifted to actually building a government, his star just faded fast. He was barely even mentioned in the constitutional debates, and when he was, it was often by the people who lost the argument. Get this. Even James Madison, the father of the Constitution himself, called some of Locke's views warped. See, Madison's whole focus wasn't on drawing these rigid, absolute lines that could never be crossed. His solution, which he famously laid out in Federalist 51, was to build a system where the different branches had the tools, and more importantly, the incentive, the ambition, as he put it, to check each other. It was all about a dynamic system, not a static, frozen one. And get this is the real kicker. The framers and the very first Congress had at least two clear shots to write a non-delegation rule right into the Constitution. A proposal was shot down at the Constitutional Convention, and then a similar amendment got struck down by the Senate. Both times, they looked at the idea and said, nope, not for us. Okay, so let's bring this all together. What does this whole story, this vanishing revolution and its hidden history, what does it all really mean? Well, the mystery's pretty much solved. The court sidestepped a huge constitutional revolution because it had already developed a much shrewder, more durable, and way less politically risky path to get what it wanted, reining in the administrative state. It's a quiet recalibration, not a loud, messy demolition. But here's the thing. This quiet approach comes with its own massive risks. Critics are warning that by using these new doctrines to strike down major policies, the court isn't just interpreting laws anymore. It's actively seizing policymaking power for itself, creating something that some have called a government by judiciary. So that leaves us with one final lingering question, doesn't it? The big, loud revolution might have vanished, but the goal, transforming the administrative state, that's very much alive and kicking. So, did the Supreme Court simply trade a frontal assault for a quieter, more effective siege? Is this a masterstroke of judicial strategy? Or is it a slow-motion seizure of power that the other branches of government just aren't equipped to stop?